Welcome everyone. This is the Tech Talk of ICQ, and we have a very good subject for today, which is...
We're going to talk about seniority and what it means to be an experienced engineer. This is something that's a really subjective thing. When you say I'm a senior engineer, it will mean something different whether you work at a company like Uber, where I'm working at, or different companies, small company, big company. But today we're going to talk about what my experience or our experience is in this topic, and we'll go around this one.
My name is Bálint Farkas, and for the past 7 years I have been working as an Agile coach, mainly with engineering teams, leaders of these teams, and sometimes the leaders of the leaders of the leaders. And
so you've done a lot of work around this, and I'm Gergely Orosz. I work as an engineering manager at Uber in Amsterdam. I've been here for about 3 years, and before Uber, I worked at various tech companies in London, mainly at Skyscanner, Skype, and a few others.
All right, so let's fire it up. Let's begin with somewhere. What is the career path? Because I think if you check out any company's job description, then you see that usually a manager has a bullet point which is called responsible for the career path of the subordinate. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, so that's, I think, a great way to start off. Career paths are really interesting, and most companies have somewhat defined career paths. Some have really well-defined career paths the bigger they are. At a startup, you just start off and you're just an engineer, or you might get the title senior engineer or whatever. Everyone starts the same way. But after a while, you have to differentiate. I would say when you have about 10, 20, maximum 30 people, you want to introduce some sort of notion of who's more experienced, who's less experienced. And fast forward, most companies today implement some level of career ladders, which typically is the entry-level software engineer, often called junior or just simply software engineer, not belittling the fact that you already know how to do certain things. There's the senior level, which is quite common across the industry. It does mean different things for different companies. And then for bigger companies or companies who are really focused on individual career growth, you have the level above it, which is often called staff engineer, principal, distinguished, and so on. But I like to think of it as these three levels: the kind of entry level, or when you're starting out in the industry, a senior, and whatever comes above senior, which is an interesting thing to talk about.
Right, and what's the differentiator for you?
To me, the biggest differentiator, just before we jump back, I just want to add one last thing. Right. So career paths, I just talked about what you do when you just don't want to work with, you don't want to manage people. So because management is also part of these career ladders, a lot of people, including myself, you start off as a software engineer, you write code, you solve problems, you realize you like it, you start mentoring. And sooner or later, you make this choice of, do I want to work more with people? And you go into engineering management, or do I just not want to take on that part and keep on growing as an individual contributor? So you do have that kind of management. And then, of course, there's some other things. Some people will switch over to be product managers, etc. But today I say, let's focus on the people who say, look, I don't want to deal with the whole management part, either because I don't like it or because I don't find it exciting. I just want to keep being better and better at software engineering.
All right. So our aim is to give some knowledge about this, talk about our experience regarding what tools do you have as an engineer who would like to grow in your position, or as a manager, what tools do you have to coach or mentor people?
Yeah, so everyone will tell you differences, and there might be some differences in the companies. But my experience specifically with working at places like Skype or Microsoft and Skyscanner and Uber, places that are growing really fast and places that are product-focused companies. This means that you're building products and you're really close to the customer. So you build something, you ship it, you often use continuous integration. Typically, your code is live within hours. You don't have to go through a lot of these different steps, but because of this, you have a strong notion of what you're building and who you're building for. And the other point of these companies, they're growing quite quickly. So in these places, the differences between like a software engineer senior and I'm just going to use the term staff engineer, which you can think of it as principal or distinguished. The difference is in your impact and how much impact you're having.
What do you mean by impact? Sorry.
So impact meaning when you get work done, what's the kind of blast radius, if you will. So the software engineer, you typically pick up tasks. You work on a part of a system, and you take something that's pretty well defined. Often your team lead or senior engineer will break it down and say, why don't you get this part done, and then you ship it. When you move one level up, so you're kind of there at you do well-defined problems that are moderately complex, if you will. It's still difficult work, but you don't have to think too much about the boundaries. At the next level, the kind of senior level, you take ownership of whole projects. So you might take something like, we're launching a new feature in an app which a bunch of people will use, and it's quite complex. How are we going to get this whole thing done? As a senior engineer, you're kind of expected to take ownership of this whole problem, break it down, work with product managers, with other parts of the business, and help and work with a team, sometimes even potentially lead that team, and help them get it done, of course, while you also pull your weight. So now you're jumping into complex problems, you're mentoring people, coaching people, and so on. Okay. And some companies differentiate sometimes between senior engineer and a lead. I like to just bundle them all together. You can kind of pull it out if you really want to. And then the really exciting part for me is what comes after that, because a lot of people who I know, and myself included for a long time, I didn't really know what's beyond this, because this is already what I describe as this kind of senior engineer could be a founder at a startup. They often have the title of VP of engineering at a 10% company. That kind of stuff. So what comes after that? And after that, the staff level typically is when you impact the whole company consistently. So the bigger the company, the bigger the impact. But a good way to think of it is at Uber, we have staff engineers who have built our payment system that put down the core design and have built the system end-to-end, leading a large team across a lot of different teams, a lot of different units that now processes all of our payments, and it moves a bunch of money in the billions. When there's a problem with it, the impact is in the millions. And this is a problem that's way beyond just one project. It's between different groups. They have to influence a lot of people. They have to push forward sometimes. They have to be tactful other times. So it's really to go above that traditional senior role, you need to have a place where you can have the impact. And then it's a lot of challenges and a lot of growth.
So you're saying in a nutshell that it's about what complexity can you tackle, with how many people you do that, what's your impact, what the kind of decisions and how you make decisions. And finally, these regions not really owned by a group or belonging to an organization, rather than somewhere in the center, in the middle, or between.
So I usually like to think of it as scope and impact. Scope being the complexity, as you put it, and impact the output. Because I'll give an example of a lot of times as software engineers, we love complex problems, and I've seen people who are often wanting to demonstrate that they're able to solve complex problems. They go off and they solve a really complex problem. A good example is you build a whole new type of compiler or a design language, a declarative language that will generate models, which is really complex and really interesting and a really hard problem. But if it doesn't have the impact, meaning, let's say if you work at a company that is selling ads and it has no impact on the ads business, then you're not really helping the company. So when you're at this staff level, you really need to understand, where does the company make their profits? How can it take the interesting problems, or actually the complex problems, which are often not interesting, that will help this company move forward? So these engineers will often take problems like, our engineering organization is really slow because we have these legacy systems. How are we going to speed that up? Or we need to get faster to market, or we need to experiment faster.
All right. Got a little challenging question for you. So you said that, these somewhat belonging to titles, these complexity or impact belonging to titles. Do you think that when you're an engineer in one of these teams who's working on as you said, tasks, how can you have the best idea? So you have the best idea in the world. How can you make that idea alive? And maybe you're not agreeing with the senior member of the team. So what can you do?
Yeah, so I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. And you said that these complexity is kind of aligned with titles.
All right.
I just want to clarify that it's usually aligned with the expectations. So let's say when you're a staff engineer, you're expected to be able to solve these large problems. Yep. If you're a junior engineer, you might solve it, and then you're like, wow, you're like, high five, you've gone way above your expectation. But if you're that staff engineer and you can't ship this project, just want to make it clear that it's not like, hey, only people with a certain title do certain things. But back to your question, I'm new at the organization, or I have this idea, or I'm not as experienced. If this is an organization where you're really fostering growth and you're really making it inclusive, you just put your idea on the table. And actually those people, usually a lot of my expectation of these really great engineers or people with fancy titles is they're really supportive. They should be there to actually help you, help you put your idea together, teach you in a gentle way, and often just let you even fail. If it's possible. I think great places, you come say, hey, I have this idea, and the answer is, instead of the no but, the yes and. All right, that's a great idea, and how should we move it forward?
Okay.
And this is actually a lot of things what I personally see as so the place that I work with a lot of really some of the engineers who had organizational wide impact was at Uber and Skyscanner. And at Uber, this is a typical setup. You have a team where you have these influential engineers, with a bunch of junior engineers, and actually their success or their role is when you're someone who has this organizational knowledge, you're pulled in a lot of different directions. They want to mentor people and have those people start to run the project. So often they start the project, they help, they're very involved. When things are looking good, they'll step out and join the next big project. So in most places, I would hope this should be a no-brainer, and you should get a lot of support, not only from your manager, which is kind of important, but especially from these people who you can look up to, who should be very approachable, humble. And my biggest surprise is the people I know at this level are just very nice people to talk to, and they always make time for you. I'm like, how are you doing this? You're so busy and you know so many things. So great. Okay.
So apparently you should seek this place as well. So if you're not really seeing that this is happening around you, because I think some people sometimes see that this is not happening, then you should seek one of these.
Yeah, it's a tough question, because I think you're used to working in a certain environment, and I've had people who join from other places, typically places where they were seen more as a resource. So if you work at a place where you're called a resource, I take this really seriously. In my mind, we're talking about people who are only replaceable to a certain extent. Resource means you're absolutely replaceable. And if you work at a place where managers are not necessarily technical, or you feel that you don't get this kind of support, then there are places that are different, of course. So I'd be cautious to advise on what you should or should not do, but just know that definitely I think there's a big change going through a lot of, especially tech companies, but even non-tech companies, where people are trying to provide autonomy for engineers, because here's a secret.
Why is that important? Why is autonomy important?
Yeah, I love the sarcastic question. The secret is, when people are motivated, they'll produce twice as much in the same time. Yes. That's the dirty secret that all the top tech companies, starting from Google back in the days, continuing on with Facebook, to the latest group of the current unicorns who are going IPO and who have been a success story, realize, get people motivated, get out of their way, provide them a bit of support, and see them do great things. And this is why, like some car manufacturers will turn around and look, why could we not produce a ride-sharing application like Uber? Well, there's a bunch of reasons, but I know for a fact that a lot of the culture is a lot more hierarchical. You have your place. And just to give an extreme example, one of which is a bit, I find it hard to emphasize with because I've not worked in an environment. But one of my buddies told me that he's advising a major bank in the UK. A lot of people use them, and they're running a 2 or 3 year project that is revamping the bank to be a lot more their services, rewriting a bunch of their apps, etc.
Yes.
The project is run as a big waterfall project, and they have 6 layers of project management. Engineers work on the bottom 2 layers, and the only decisions can be made from a 3rd layer. So if you're working at, as a software engineer and you have an idea, you have to talk to your boss, who talks to their boss, who will come back with a decision. So
Yep. And I think all of these companies realizing that they need to change. So
and they are changing.
Yes, and they need to change.
They need to.
Then they need to change their managerial engineering practices pretty much. Just let's consider that you're an engineer. You're listening to all this and you're realizing, hey, I'm not there. I'm not in one of these places that these guys are talking about. So me as an engineer, what kind of tools, what kind of tools do I have to change the environment where I am, where I can be heard, where my ideas can go up? So what can I do? How can I just tackle all this?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I've had a few people reach out to me on similar things. So clearly the first answer that a lot of people will think of is like, I can just change companies, which is true, you can always do that. But I do think it's a really important thing before you is to realize that might not solve your problem. So the number one thing that I've learned in the hard way, and something I'm trying to teach people earlier, is the person who owns your career and your success the most is yourself. It's not your manager. It's not the senior guy. It's not your manager's manager or not your mentor. If you have one, it's yourself. So you're going to have the biggest impact. So the first thing that you want to actually figure out is have that honest conversation with yourself. Of what do you want to do? What is it that you want to get better at? What are things that frustrate you right now? It might be that you're just upset at how people don't care about code quality around you, or it may be you just don't feel your voice heard because you'd like to leave the project, etc. There could be a lot of things, and it's important that for you to clarify that. My personal example is because if you don't, you will typically you'll probably end up leaving the team or the company, and you might not end up at a better place because you still don't know what you're after. So my example, that when I realized this a bit later, I got frustrated with my team at one of my previous companies, specifically my manager, because I felt I did everything that he asked me to, and I still didn't get the opportunities, etc., that I hoped for. I changed teams, not much changed, and then I realized that I never talked about these things, even with myself. I kind of kept it as a secret for myself. So step one is sit down and write down, or have a mental note, but it's probably even better to write down for yourself. Where do you want to go, and what are things that you like to get to or you like to change? Once you have that, that's great. You now have your goals. Now it's time to get a plan. So you know your environment, you know where you are. Figure out what are things that you can change. And once you have that, you're going to need an ally. Now, one of your strongest allies typically should be your manager. If you don't get along with your manager, and if you've got a really bad relationship with them, it'll be really tough, because you might be doing great work, but you might not get recognized for it. But once you have a plan, as a manager, I can tell you, I love when people come to me and say, hey, here's the goals that I'd like to do. Here's the plan I was thinking about. What do you think? And can you help me do this? Managers exist for one reason. They're hired to make sure that the team works better with them than without them. Now, a team is a collection of people. So actually, managers' goals are to have people who work a lot better. So I can almost guarantee that if you show up to your manager's desk and say like, hey, here's my goals, here's some of my frustrations, but I thought about it and I think I have a start here, they're going to still need to get on your side, and they'll try to do whatever limited or unlimited support you have to get them. So that's the first thing. Just kind of focus on goals. The second thing that I found very, very useful in my career, a lot of times you'll have opportunities that come around the corner. A lot of times they don't even look like opportunities. Sometimes there's this odd work that no one wants to do. Let's say you're one of the most dreaded things that we have when you work at a larger tech company is on-call, or it might be working on this system that has tons of tech debt. Work that either no one wants to do, maybe because it's new or because it's too boring, but it's important to do. Take that opportunity, and especially if you're starting to feel that you're a bit bored or you're not happy, do something new. It might mean learning a new language like Kotlin or doing something else. It might mean starting to add unit tests to an old piece of code that no one is touching and actually starting to reduce the technical depth. When you do this, you start to learn a lot more. You push yourself to unknown territories, and you also get a lot of brownie points from the people around you, because they know that you're now doing the thing that needs doing and not just a fun thing. Okay. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen people do is they are only after the fun thing that they want to do, the shiny things. And the reality, the more experienced you are, someone needs to do the dirty work. But with experience, you can turn that dirty work or boring work into something that's actually really challenging. I personally used to hate to do migrations. They're super boring, long. I'm now really excited about them, and I actually talk about them because they're super challenging. How do you do a migration without anyone seeing what's happening? And those kind of things. So these are the two biggest pieces of advice. And the final one is just get to know yourself and figure out what makes you motivated and what makes you demotivated. Usually, sometimes you feel down and you don't know why. You're thinking of just leaving this whole thing or calling in sick. But if you figure out why that was, maybe you just didn't like working alone all day, or you just hate it when you pair with this person. Once you figure those things out, you can actually start to be a bit more strategic about pairing things that give you motivation, or trying to do more of those things and doing less things that what you don't. When once one of the people on my team came to me, I like to probe people and ask them, what is the thing what does a bad day look to you when you're really just wish you could go home or just have a good day end? And some people told me that they just really don't like working on this code base, and we dug deeper, and it turns out that they just didn't like a certain part of it. So that was great, because they actually now figured out how they could fix it, and also you have some information of how you can help this person. So if you have these three things, focus, trying out new things and figuring out what you like and you don't like, you'll be set up for success. And a lot of time, even you might not be able to change the whole company, but I can guarantee that you can change your team, you can change your small environment, and there's no such thing as great companies. There are great teams, and companies who have more great teams than not.
Not great company, All right. It's very interesting, apparently, that the first thing and also the third is somewhat very much about knowing yourself. And I would just like to add that kind of like I love the idea that every kind of situation what you are in is the result of how did you decide, how did you own the problems you are facing or faced previously. So problems won't run away. This is, I think, something I've heard as well. So if you don't like your environment, going to somewhere else, well, it won't solve it. So you have to own the change, apparently, and be responsible for the change. And so great 3 ideas. I really like it. All right. So let's switch side a bit. If you're a manager, appointed as a manager, and you see that this environment is not really happening, what can you do? How can you foster to have a learning environment within a team, within teams of teams? What can you do? What's your job to have it?
So the first thing I think as a manager that you need to do, regardless of what the environment is you just really want to get to know the people, to understand what their motivations are, what their strengths are, and what their weaknesses is. Because as a manager, I like to think of myself more as a coach, someone who helps people, and we're on the same team. Your goal will be to help these people get the most out of the situation. There will be some tough times where, if you know the people's motivation, you can help them focus on what they love about this thing. And there might be some times where you just don't need to do anything and people will be just happy, etc. So first thing is just spend a bit of time with that. Once you know, you can custom tailor all of these things. The second thing that you as a manager can do is feedback. It's hard to say, hey, I want you guys to, or I want the team, everyone in the team to help each other, give more feedback, etc. without setting an example. I really believe in that. So first things first, you should help people and you should help them grow. Okay. So the easiest way to go is to start giving frequent feedback, specific feedback, actionable feedback. There's a lot of different ways you can do, but my preferred way is to, when you see something that could be, both when it was something great that they did or something that could be improved, give that feedback, see how they react to it, and build that trust where they know that they can count on you to help them. And also, if you're a hands-on manager, meaning you've been a developer, especially quite recently, so new managers have this advantage. You can step in and mentor those people, especially when they're more juniors. You can start to help them become better.
Okay.
And once you figure out how you can give feedback and how you can help others grow, you then want to scale this. So often what I do is when I work with experienced engineers on my team and we're talking about how they can get better, one of my go-to places is, well, maybe you could help other more junior engineers get better. And then I mentor them or I coach them to how on what we just talked about, how to give good feedback, how to have one-on-ones. So on my team, experienced or senior engineers often have one-on-ones with less experienced engineers. And then I talk with them. I ask them, how did it go? And sometimes I also just chat with the other party as well. And I try to help them. It's a bit, I guess this is your specialty now, where we're going to coaching, but coaching developers on the team to be great mentors.
Okay, so it's about mentorship. Your
mentorship, and if you can start this environment, no matter what environment it is, but if your team becomes an environment where people mentor each other, this thing will hopefully spread. Now there are organizations where this is a given. So when I joined Uber, it was already pretty common for people to mentor across the organization. It's not the case everywhere, but you can always start. Nothing is stopping you as a manager to create this environment, and I can tell you, word will get out, and people will start to reach out. Work with other teams, so you have nothing to lose.
At some point, it's going to be so visible that no one can basically ignore it, that this is happening in the company. And
one big thing, which is but putting my manager hat on, one of the best ways I found for people to stick around in your team or in your company is when they feel they're growing. Now, they really feel when they're growing, when they feel heard and they have access to mentors. So by doing this, if nothing else, you're going to have a team where people stay. People want to join this team. And as you said, so some of your peers or in the manager's team, they might come around and ask, what are you doing? What's going on? Why are we having so low attrition? Again, it's not a guarantee, and you'll have certain situations, but it's just a better place to work. The one thing I would caution against is, which happens at some typically non-tech companies, is when people look at this time of, here's an engineer's time, it's a box of 8 hours, and I need to know what they're doing in every single hour. It often happens with consultancies, whatnot. So one of the reasons people really churn from these places, and again, I've talked with a couple of people, mentorship is absolutely discouraged because they're thinking or pairing that this is a really bad use of people's time. Again, going back to the original thing, it's not binary. And there's a different school of thought, but I firmly believe that you want to invest in this area and create the space and a little bit of maybe inefficiency for initial few weeks until people can become a lot more efficient on the long term.
All right. Also, would like to point out that this is pretty much about becoming a master in what you're doing, because teaching something is giving you a new perspective, because you have to understand so well what you're dealing with that even you become better while mentoring. It's not only about the relationship between people, not about building a great culture, but also how you understand more profound ways of what your code base, how you are working, what's the business, because you have to teach it. So
exactly,
it's a big motivation.
And also one of the reasons it's really important, if you aim to say, like, I want to be this amazing engineer that, there's some fellows at Google or Microsoft or whatnot who write all sorts of very interesting things and sound really smart, frankly. What they did is they did a lot of teaching initially within the company, but one of the biggest hurdles I see when it comes to experienced engineers is we push them, well, if you're a really experienced engineer working at a great company, you should really be able to contribute to the industry, go to, let's say, speak at events or write posts. Now, to do that, you need to be a great teacher. If you're a great teacher, this is really easy, but to prepare for that, just start teaching small. I'm not saying go out and blog or speak at conferences. Just try to explain to the junior person next to you or the bit more experienced person how this works, and figure out and ask them afterwards, hey, how did I do? Did it make sense? Did you learn, or do you have some feedback for me?
I think no one's born to be a teacher. At initial point, it's always a learning process.
We all start at the same place.
So it's all about practice, and you have to decide your goals. So you have to decide your goals. If you would like to be a very good fellow at any of these companies, then you need to do, you are going to learn about how to do this teaching, about mentoring, and well, no one born as one.
And you get to know yourself.
And ultimately you know yourself. Yep, that's it. I think we had fun.
This was a really, really great conversation.
All right, so next time, please join for the next session if you have time. We guarantee it's going to be similar. And if you have any kind of comments or you just want to express your opinion, then please just leave a comment below the video. And well, see you next time.
See you next time.